I want to talk to you about restorative justice, a surprising approach that might offer better outcomes for victims, offenders, and the communities they live in. And I want to suggest that in order for it to work, we all have to do our part. Now, restorative justice is not a new idea. Some people say it's the most common approach to justice across the world and throughout time, but that somewhere along the way, we forgot how to do it. It's a philosophy that says getting justice means repairing harm. In restorative justice, repairing harm happens through face-to-face dialogues between the people harmed and the people responsible. For instance, here in Colorado, hundreds of cases are diverted from the courts each year through restorative conferences that bring together victims, offenders, and affected community members to agree on how to repair harms after a property crime or an assault.
I spent 21 years, 7 months, and 29 days in prison for a crime I did not commit. I'm used to the system feeling me because I'm used to the systems feeling my people. As a black exoneree, it's parallel to the experience of like the one slave. You can be taken from our land and put into bondage. It's the same to me as being taken from your community and put in bondage because of the color of your skin. Get involved in correcting the injustice.
Hey everyone, my name is Lulu Cameron. I am your host for tonight on Second Chances. Just take a moment and share and send this out to as many people as you can. It's going to be very impactful this evening. Of course, you know the month of May is mental health awareness, and mental health awareness impacts us in many different ways. And I think that mental health impacts us in many different ways, but the awareness is something that you can't hear me? Hold on one second. Let's see. Let me see if anybody else, can anyone hear me? Can y'all give me a thumbs up if you can hear me? I see there's a couple people watching. Yeah, so they can hear me. Sorry, so Dave will take a step out and he'll come right back. But just to start again, thank you all for joining us this evening. My name is Lulu Cameron, and I am the founder of South Carolina for Restorative Justice. I'm also a justice consultant, and I work to help change policies and laws and legislation all across this country as it relates to the criminal justice system. And so in doing that, we have to partner with some amazing people to help bring the voice of the needs that are necessary in this country in order to bring change. And tonight with me, I have one of my favorite people and partners in business to work with. His name is David Shrank, and he is here to discuss with us mental health. And I'll go ahead and give you a little bit of information about Dave, and then I'll bring him on. Let's see. So David Shrank is the founder and CEO of Empowerment Behavioral Therapeutic Services. He's clinically licensed therapist and a social worker. Dave is an expert in trauma of all types, but especially that of veteran care, incarceration, sexual assault, gang intervention, and bullying. Dave is also an expert in predicting violent behavior and has provided consulting to multiple government bodies. Dave is currently the board chair of the National Trauma and Education Advisory Board and a member for Capital Network Venture Veterans Engagement Board and a leader for Progressive Maryland's Drug and Alcohol Policy Task Force. So I'll go ahead and bring Dave on. Hi,
Hello.
Dave.
Hello. How are
Thanks.
you doing?
I'm great. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. Sorry McKinney was not able to be with us this evening, but I'm sure we'll be able to get the job done. So please take a moment and share this live stream with someone who can benefit from listening to the conversation or being a part of the conversation in the comments. With the crime epidemic in our country, it has our roots in the gradual breakdown of societal structures, starting from the family unit. Psychologists have provided data that demonstrate the connection between dysfunctional family units and maladaptive behavior patterns, which lead to crime. Experiencing traumatic experiences such domestic and intercommunity violence directly or vicariously can render a person's healthy adjustment to societal norms. We will take this time today to kind of evaluate some of that, being that it's Mental Health Awareness Month, and discuss the growing trend of behavioral therapy models that are being used in trauma impacted communities, as well as in the U.S. correctional facilities, and the need to increase the implement such programs on a broader scale. So no better person to talk about all of that with except for you, Dave. So thank you so much for being here, and thank y'all for joining us again on this episode of Second Chances. So Dave, how have you been?
Been good, and I thank you so much for having me on. It's truly an honor.
Yeah, definitely. So just, no pressure. Just tell us a little bit about how you got into this game, like what brought you to this being a part of your passion. Because I can assure everyone is anytime that I call Dave, he shows up. I can just be in the city of Washington, D.C., or I can be in the need of something somewhere in the country in South Carolina, and he's like Johnny on the spot. So I appreciate that. So tell us a little bit about how you got here.
So my own background stems from being a person who stutters and someone who has a lot of learning differences. I've got just about every learning difference in the book. It led to having to go to specialized schools, which is where I endured a tremendous amount of physical and verbal bullying. The reality is that back then, and still kind of now, the responses to it were almost non-existent. And now, bear in mind, I come from an exceptionally privileged background. My parents had lots and lots of funds and were able to find a school that could deal with the severity of my learning differences, and they're talking to the school day in day out and asking why their child they're paying to be there is getting his butt kicked every day. That then but led me to wanting to stop bullying in schools, and so I decided to go to school for psychology and then for social work. The reality there is that most were saying how someone who is LD and stutter is going to be going into the mental health field. It sounds entirely counterproductive when your job is to talk to others and you can't talk. Needless to say, my success rate from day one was shockingly high in my ability to connect with clients and families, and it led me to wanting to get experience in all the most extreme areas of mental health. That led into I'm into reentry services and gang intervention work, and I work very deeply with the gangs of Trenton, uh, New Jersey, Philly, Baltimore, and now in DC. Um, and in Trenton, I was often referred to as the gang guy because I was working predominantly with very high level gang members. And the thing that it really pointed out to me was when working with the schools and in truancy and the community, how incredibly brilliant most of the people I came across were. So the difference between me and them was simply the fact that my parents had money, had resources to send me to the schools that had the most supports, which really made me want to bring a different level of support to the urban community, and especially those of color, because there is such brilliance, in unbelievable brilliance, and and looking at the fact that if more kids in the urban community had the privilege I did, to get the best schools, best supports, best things, cancer would be cured. We could find the best responses to everything in God's name, and therefore that is really where much of my passion comes from, for trying to get as many people out of jail, out of prison, out of juvie as possible, educate people as much as possible, and get people adding to society instead of
Yeah.
having to to use the system.
Yeah. So you said, so something that I love when you tell that story, because it helps people to understand you. It helps people to understand your passion, and it gives people a more personal opportunity to say, "Well, he probably knows a lot. Has had a lot of experience with it growing up. Just some of the different abuses, some of the things that you can face as a young person who is struggling with something, whether you understand what it is or not, in the way that other adults respond to you." And so, having been a former school administrator, I know that um, sometimes children don't get, they can't help what they're born into. And when we as a community don't understand the different ramifications of different mental health components, we don't know how to help our own kids. And so, in your circumstance, it was a little bit different because your parents understood that you had some learning disablements and you had some things going on. But for a lot of people, they really don't understand that, hey, something may be a little bit off here, and I'm not quite sure how to fix it. And so I'm a big proponent of believing that, we got to have us first, right? We can't keep relying on other people and other resources to provide a way for us to have a means of understanding our own children. And so I think that a large component of the kids who were struggling just in the school that I was at, it came from a denial of the parents, a part of it. And then a part of it was an ignorance of the unknown, right? So, there's a lot of children being labeled ADHD. Okay. There's ADHD, but there's also emotional behavioral disorder. There's also, a lot of different things that can be going on with your children, like dyslexia, that can enable them from being great. And if we continue to just feel like someone is trying to label our children, we're also causing them as much harm as the system is impacting them with the traumas, because they don't understand what's wrong with this child. I got 30 other kids in this classroom. I don't have time to deal with your child who's having a problem and you don't even know what it is. And not only do you not know what it is, but you're also not receptive to learning what it is and working with me as a teacher to help bring some of the solution to the table. So what do you kind of say about that? Like, because I know that you do a lot of work on the high level in the correctional facilities and the juvenile detention centers with the gang members. But for me, when I see people turn into street organizations, it's because there's a sense of need or belonging to something. They're not able to fall within the guidelines of the societal norms or the expectations within their own family, and so they turn to people that are outside. And not to say I don't know that every single thing that I see is negative, but I do, it has a negative connotation. And so what would you say to parents and young people or people who know that they have something up with them? Like, what are some of the things that you do or they can do to kind of put themselves in a better position?
Well, there's a couple, a couple things I want to say in response. One is that I find it to be a very destructive thing how often kids and adults are not taken seriously because of how often they said, I didn't do it. The reality is probably 95% of the time, the reason why that is being said is because the first time some form of hierarchy stopped a child or young adult for doing something, they actually hadn't done it. And since then, they've always said, I didn't do it, because the first time they didn't. They got targeted, were stuffed in juvie or in jail, and tried it as an adult at an abnormally young age, and have never gotten their fair chance. That being said, I think it also really needs to be understood that there is so much love and support in urban communities, and a big part of that, you can call it, and the term gang gets such a negative connotation, but the fact is, gangs were set up to support, to be families. When kids didn't have parents around, it gave kids shelter, safety, food, water. And yes, do gangs at times do a lot of them illegal things now, and historically, yes, but there is also a tremendous amount of love and care, and therefore, if you're trying to push a kid or an adult not to be in a gang, you have to be able to provide the resources, the foundation, in order to be successful. Simply telling a kid not to join a gang, or a young adult not to join a gang because it's bad, is just going to send the child or adult right into that gang, because at least there is protection in a very bad environment. There, at least there is support. There's food. There's sneakers when they're going out of them. There's all needs are being met, whether it comes from legal money or not. All needs are being met. Therefore, from the standpoint of services, just to provide therapy to someone is not enough. You need to provide wraparound care. There must be supports for the child or young adult or elderly, whatever the age is. There must be mental health support, family support, and that family support does not have to be biological. If it is, fantastic. But others in the community, from religious environments or from wherever it comes from, people doing positive things that can add support to someone's life, having a job to go to. It is such a misconception that people don't want to work. The reason why so many don't want to work is because they're kicked down again and again and again and again and again.
Yeah, and that's something that I think that as a societal whole, we have to look at the fact that you can't necessarily fix the mental health that takes place inside of prisons just because they're in prison. That's something that happens in the communities first. It happens in the schools that they go to. It happens to all those different community organizations that they may interact with, whether that's the Boys and Girls Club, whether that is, the gang that they're involved with, and or any after school programming or sports that they might play. And so the point of the matter is, and I think where we fail to kind of meet the mark, is understanding that children who struggle with trauma and mental health issues, or even any type of learning disabilities that cause them to fall or feel inadequate within their school system or within their social group, it puts them in a circumstance in which they kind of have this chip on their shoulder as an adult. That's something that they carry with them. It's something that you have to be working on, consciously as a child is young, as they develop into a young adult, as they develop further into an adult, regardless of if they're in prison or if they're on the street. People have to be treated like actual human beings. And the biggest part is that so much of our society is wrapped around as you do as I say because I said so, instead of showing people how to make the best choices that they have in front of them based on whatever their personal needs are. So Dave, you've got a big quiet ego behind you that I love to kind of bring out. You have been acknowledged, for having some of the best numbers with the wraparound services that you have provided in the past with some of your programming. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, stats can be useful when just showing the success rate of all programs. Like I said, don't want to take the all credit. Well, I especially don't want to take credit when it is not me doing it. It is not the teams doing it. It is the clients with the right resources, the people being serviced that are making such immense changes in their lives. That being said, in Trenton, New Jersey, for example, when I worked in the reentry program there, the rate of recidivism was between 94 to 96%. The program itself had taken that average down to about 70%. We then, now when I started working with them, we got more and more connections to assure that each person coming out of jail or prison, if they went straight for housing that specific day, could get housing, insurance, housing, Medicaid, a therapist, a case manager, a psychiatrist, and potentially a job, all within the first 3 days. At least everything besides the job had to be there in the first 3 days, and housing had to be there that first day. The job came soon after because people really do want to work. It feeds people's self-esteem to be able to find something they can be successful with, whether they're being paid or it's volunteer. They want to have something to really do. And the rate of recidivism for the program went down to about 25 to 30%. That being said, of the clients that I had worked with who did such a fantastic job, in that year I'd worked with about 160 people, and the rate of recidivism was less than 3% because only 3 of my clients ever went back to jail.
Wow, that's awesome. And I think that people need to understand that it's programs like these that will be more of a help in society, creating safer communities and safe. They always act like when you're releasing someone from prison, you're releasing a monster. And actually, it's quite the opposite. Some of the best people that I've met as an adult, and in my lifetime are incarcerated. And and that's because and I always say this, they have to wear the scarlet letter of whatever their crime is. We all fall short and we've all done things that could have been us, right? And so whether we just ran through the white lines on the crosswalk, or, we've done a few things that we're not so proud of, but nobody knows those things, right? And so someone who's incarcerated, they wear their crimes every day for the entire time of their sentence. And so let's just kind of, I want to ask you a couple of questions, just as it relates to that, like as it relates to how, prisons can kind of be a breeding ground for producing more socially and emotionally handicapped people. Like how do your programs work to produce the latter? Like, when a person is in prison, they should be working towards their redemption, but what do you think needs to be done, or how could your programs work with correctional officers and facilities and maybe directors or states to help them to understand how this should go versus how it's actually going?
I love that question. Unfortunately, similar to the community, but especially in jail and prison, there's us versus them mentality. Correctional officers against the inmates. When you have an environment like that, it leads to tremendous struggle. Whereas inmates are looked at as being the lowest of the low of dirt. When people are treated in such a way, it's hard to see themselves as something more. It's hard to see themselves as a person. Not to mention the fact that, speaking of gangs actually get much stronger in prison and in jail. They unite together, have like the Latin Kings and Bloods come together. You have different gangs that in the community outside are trying to kill each other, but while locked up are actually supporting each other, but causing more damage. Gangs in prison are entirely scary. Yes, it is a way to get protection, but it really strengthens the connections to do negative things because of the culture that exists. The way to change that is there is an area of therapy, a theoretical basis called motivational interviewing. I'm not saying that anyone who is not trained to be should become a therapist, not at all. But when you change your ways of talking to someone, and instead of talking down to someone, you ask a question. If you talk to a person in caring, nicer ways, how can I be of help? What do you need? Now there is the fear that for a correctional officer, you let your guard down and you get taken advantage of. But that's because of what the culture has become. In order to change that culture, the us versus them mentality has to go. And with that going, I mean, you could have a much more conducive environment to people getting help. I do not agree with the prison system as a whole because it's not correctional. It is destructive. But if you're going to have it, at least have correctional officers knowing how to talk to inmates as people and being able to enhance their knowledge of how to take care of themselves. People in jail and prison who've come out almost always say you know what? Jail made me a man. Prison made me a man. It's actually the opposite. It puts you back into a childlike state because you have to eat at certain times, you have to shower at certain times, you have to work out at certain times, and it's all coming to you. You resort back to a childlike state. So,
Yeah.
so it actually you need more support to keep adult mentalities and teach you how to be resourceful outside the prison to be able to be more successful. Without that, you are setting every single person up for failure when being released.
Yeah, and it's important that you say that because a lot of times, the prison directors, leadership, wardens, lieutenants, majors, correctional officers, um, they go at the whole process and the way that they attack their day to day work with the incarcerated population is like they're hunting wild bear. You know, every now and again, you will hear people tell me, or people who are currently incarcerated, when there's been someone who has displayed a level of compassion to them that really moved them, because they just don't see it. And that's unfortunate. And so, always, I'm a firm believer that you can't get something out of someone that's not put into them. And
Mm-hmm.
so, if a person came to prison and they had a troubled upbringing or a troubled lifestyle, and the only thing that's put into them is um, overbearing, um, hyper masculinity, you know what I mean? Like microaggressions being passed down through correctional officers. And then you want a person to become something beautiful and guided. And it just doesn't work like that. It has to start um, uh, one of my favorite people, Shannon Ross out of Milwaukee, he's the founder of the community. He said he always talks about how reentry starts at the point of incarceration. And he was the first person that I ever heard say that. Although it makes perfect sense, it's not an idea that's adopted in most places. But outside of that, working with the communities where people are reentering, you know what I mean? Like, yes, it's great that people have programs, but because, or, that they have these changed mindsets and these ideas, but because of the fear mongering that society puts out onto the communities, it creates almost like a traumatic experience of their own mental health when they think someone is being released. You have a guy right now that's been released from prison by a lawyer who's a legislator who has connections with the judge. I won't get into that detail, in the state of South Carolina. And even though you released him because he did something for the institution or for the correctional department, it's like we're on a witch hunt for a man who's willing, ready and willing to kill and shoot, and it's just like it's not that. And so, while I don't want to get into the details of that circumstance, it's just the fear mongering that they've put out. The caption is convicted murderer of X, Y, and Z, is on the loose. No, he's not. He didn't escape from prison. And so I think that when we can get the conversations and the wordplay that they choose to use around the incarcerated population's persona,
Mm-hmm.
it helps to change the atmosphere in the communities that people will be returning to, and also the neighborhoods that they might live in and the schools that they might live by. And it might give them a different perspective if they knew that people who were incarcerated, yes, they had a difficult time just like you did. You just didn't go to prison. But in the same token, if you know that they have spent time working on themselves and they've done these programs because they were there to actually do the programs, not that communities and jails and prisons and correctional departments are just capitalizing off of the incarceration and never addressing the actual problem. You have a lot of people and a lot of Department of Corrections that'll tell you we don't focus on mental health. Well, if you're not going to focus on mental health, then what is it that you're doing? Because if you lock a person in a room the size of my bathroom and expect them to stay that way and stay mentally strong and mentally healthy, and you're not going to focus on any of it, you're adding to the problem.
Absolutely. And I kind of want to extend that even further, because I've seen various other reentry programs that really don't have nearly the same level of success, and a big part of that is that the social workers are people who are simply burnt out and just trying to do the bare minimum. If a person coming out of jail or prison does not feel cared for, if the person does not feel a person's compassion, the hope, you have to be ready to hear every curse in the book. This person is coming out pissed off from so much trauma the person has been through while locked up. Yeah, and you could be getting tested. Pass the damn test. Have the compassion. As soon as you turn away and say this is too much, this person didn't change at all, just send them back. That's common mentality that leads to recidivism being so common. You have to have thorough services and people who understand the jail and prison culture and are really compassionate about making a difference. You're going to face a ton of resistance. You got to be ready to deal with that with a smile, with care, with love, and
Right.
that you will have success.
And I also think what's really important, especially since a lot of the correctional facilities or prisons in the United States of America don't focus on mental health, that we have people on the outside that are ready to receive people who have been incarcerated. Yeah, we have right now the country is focusing a lot on mental health, and they're talking about how important it is that if you need to talk to someone, that you find someone to talk to. But there's nothing like pulling up on a counselor or a therapist that is not willing to talk to you about your prison experience, that has no understanding. A lot of what's been taught to society is that those people in prison, they're living tax free, they're eating good and playing video games and watching cable TV, when we know that what they're eating is majority of the time not even for human consumption.
Nope, it's awful.
I mean, my loved one who's incarcerated told me that it's nothing for him to expect to eat a few bugs here or there. And then you talk about the conditions of the inside of those prisons. I know what it feels like to go into a nasty grocery store and feel like I have to get something to eat from there, but to live in an environment that's not conducive to my well-being. The lighting, you got low lights, you got water coming in through the windows. I mean, you have all these extreme circumstances, and then you want a person to be mentally sound.
Black mold everywhere.
Yeah. So I think what really needs to happen is we need to have a greater pull in society that says we got to start listening when people are saying these things are going on inside of these prisons, because a lot of times it's our word against theirs. And, unfortunately, a lot of retaliation comes from trying to expose some of these circumstances that just need to be exposed so that they can be changed. But they're all circumstances that play into the mental health component of the people who are currently incarcerated that will 95% of the time return back to society, which includes our communities. So they're going to be in your Walmart, they're going to be in your Target, they're going to be shopping at your grocery store, in your gas station. Or they're going to be standing on the corner asking you for some money because they can't figure out a way to make it happen, because the way that we set this up in society was to place the most difficult understanding on the communities about the incarcerated population, for them to believe the shenanigans that we have deployed as the United States of American criminal justice system to incarcerate Black and brown people at high numbers.
The highest.
Because that was the whole plan. That was the whole plan from day one. And we have got to get to a place where we can actually admit our faults. We can never be a leader. I will never follow a man that cannot admit when he's wrong. I'm never going to follow or listen to the doings of a country that was built on such heinous, unnecessary traumas. And so once we start addressing those things, then we can start dealing with people's mental health and really looking at people for who they are, which is a human being. And a lot of these states now we're seeing the heartbeat bills being passed or no abortion laws because all these lives matter. Well, if all these lives matter, they matter when they're in the uterus and they matter when they're behind the wall.
It's very hard to be truly, as they say, pro-life, so to speak, when you don't stand for supporting a majority of the population.
Yeah.
When there are just so many that are considered to be less than or not worthy of rights.
Yeah.
Of life.
And those things are absolutely true. Let me ask you, what would you say is what in a perfect world, like in a perfect world in your head, right? What would that look like? Because I know that there's some very interesting things that are going on behind these empowerment therapeutics, behavioral programmings. What's like your favorite one? What's something that you think that every single person could benefit from? I know what I think, but I'll listen to yours first.
Increased understanding of those that are not within your culture. For those who say they don't see race, they don't see, it's actually a very racist statement in itself, because it's saying you're expecting everyone else to act, think, and respond like you, and if they don't, it's not comfortable to you. We need to be embracing each other's background, embracing each other's cultures, understanding each other, understanding each other's cultural, physical background, countries, everything. There is so much amazing culture that has been passed off and not accepted, when that's what makes us rich. I love being able to go to training, or I love giving a training and kind of pushing everyone there to learn something about everyone that is in that room, or at least having each table and making the tables as diverse as possible, whereas friends always like to sit together, pushing people to be at tables that they wouldn't normally be at, and learning so much more about different cultural backgrounds. One of my first questions to others is what their background is, what they enjoy doing, who they are, what makes them tick. And frankly, in terms of the word empowerment itself, it is disturbing to see how many people have such low self-esteem overall. And if a person has low self-esteem, they will not be able to accept services in a positive way. They will not be able to open themselves up to their past trauma and trust the therapist, trust the case manager, trust whomever it is to get the services needed. So empowerment is the number one thing that must be done, so people are brought out of their shells, cared for, and learning to love themselves. learning to appreciate themselves, learn to love them as hard as their background could have been, to love them their background. I will freely say I used to hate the fact that I stuttered so stinking much when I was 13. It could take me up to 5 minutes to say my name. I was debilitated by it. Yet now I love my stuttering. I put at times will put it on more just to be heard, because it is an element that's going to cause people's ears to pick up more. And even in doing lobbying, I stutter all the more to get the people in government to hear me out more. And the fact is, our differences do become our strengths. We need to learn how to love our differences, love what makes us unique individuals, and love what makes us who we are. And I just lost all sound. Hang on. Crap. I just lost all sound.
Is this better?
Perfect.
Can you
Yes, perfect.
Okay.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
All right. So I was saying that I think that what you said is really important as we look at this country as being a place that's considered to be a huge melting pot of people from all over the place. But what really comes up and it causes a lot of issues is when we refuse to understand another person's perspective. Now, if we're refusing to understand another person's perspective because of hatred that we have in our hearts, that's something that we also need to deal with. And that's also a huge part of the mental health component that plagues this entire country, right? Because if I know that you hate me, or if I'm concerned that you hate me before I enter the room just because of who I am, then it's going to make me less confident in my ability to communicate with you, regardless of what it is. Now, it's different when you don't know it and people hate you. But I think that when we become more knowledgeable about the why behind people's cultural movements and the reasons why different communities move and interact the way that they do, it becomes a point of understanding. And so now it's not like, oh, well, it's just me against you or us against them. It's us understanding, hey, we do this for this reason. But I do think that overall, a large part of the stresses that people face day to day come from the unwillingness to admit as a country our faults. We have a lot of people who are still hurting, a lot of people who are still plagued by the past, and a lot of people who are still living fruitfully from the past. And so I think that when we can begin to accept our own fault, and this is a part of the most beautiful reason why I love some of the people that I've met that are currently incarcerated, is because they've come to peace with their past, regardless of what that is. Right? And that's not everybody's story, but there are a lot of the people that I know, it's their story, right? They've come to peace with their past and they're trying to move forward. And so when you have that in you, it plays out differently. But as you can see, it's just like a fight that never is resolved. When you don't come to peace with the past that you have, it continues to cause all of this mental anguish. And to me, that's just a prime example of the American criminal justice system, right? And so I just feel like if we can do that, we can definitely move forward. And then I would definitely like to see people moving away from the medicinal practices of behavioral therapeutics and get back to some of the traditions of the ancestors and things that were highly sought after, and now you see they're being utilized in Western communities all across the country. Even though you got them from someone's culture, now you're requiring a person to have a doctrine or some type of lettering behind their name in order to practice these things on a grand scale. So I think that getting back to some of the natural ways of healing, some of the different mental health components that people battle is a necessary, because we just can't keep pumping everybody up with different medicines and not really providing valuable solutions that help them to resolve some of the issues that they may be working with.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, Dave, this has been a great conversation. Is there anything else you can think of that you would like to kind of leave us with?
I wouldn't, in the sense that I find people are, some are too passive in how much they can be of help to others, and I've met so many who have such good hearts and want to help more, but just don't know what to do.
Mhm.
Go um to homeless shelters. Go to soup kitchens. Hear people's stories. Understand where they came from. People do want to be heard and are happy to share their stories. I've been to just about every homeless shelter, I think, between Trenton, Philly, Baltimore, and DC. Really hearing people's backgrounds and stories have given me so much more insight into the problems of the system that I would not have known just from working in mental health. I may have worked in all the most extreme areas and all depths, but hearing people's real stories makes such a big difference to really understand what people have gone through, and it makes others so much more appreciative, because when you're in a homeless shelter or don't have enough money for food and going to a soup kitchen, you feel so insignificant. Not to say that everyone does, but a lot do. And to talk to people, hear their stories, hear their backgrounds, it makes people feel like they have a reason to be there and share their story with you, and it will end up making you so much more aware of what truly goes on, not of what just the media shows, not just what you read in newspapers, but what really goes on in people's lives. Please go out, help others, be of help, be of care, show your heart.
Yeah.
And
So I definitely agree with you on that. I'm a huge proponent of storytelling. It's the one opportunity that you have to change a person's heart about what they think about your circumstance, but they didn't really know. Right. And so a lot of times when I will walk into different training rooms, I'll ask people to tell me 3 or 4 things that you think you know about me. And majority of the time, all of them are wrong. And it's just because, as you know, human beings, we've been programmed to judge a person by what we see, and we don't even know anything, right? So when people are willing to share their stories, and so for me, it's important that families of the incarcerated share their stories and their experiences about the American criminal justice system. And we also hear the actual stories of people who are currently incarcerated, not just formerly incarcerated, but currently incarcerated and still enduring some of the traumas that they experienced through their incarceration, and even how they arrived in this place. I think that it would help to shape the way that the American culture sees those who are incarcerated, and could help us to actually make the changes through legislation and policy all across this country that are definitely long overdue, in order to see people return home to their families and to their communities. Because if we knew the truth behind a lot of people's whys, I'm certain that we wouldn't try to handle it as a one size fits all. So,
and one more thing that I do want to add is, it needs to be said, needs to be said. I thank you, Lulu, for what you do, because you do so much in the background for people that most have no concept of. You are everywhere doing everything, helping so many people. It is ridiculous. It is amazing, and you deserve to be celebrated for that. So thank you. Thank you. What's sorry for that, but it's true. You really do.
Well, thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. I do. I do a lot of things that people don't know about. I do a lot, and this entire process can be very, very draining. So I thank you for being one of those people who always acknowledge the efforts that I make, and you try to jump in and do your part wherever you can from whatever state you're in and however I need it to go down, and you're willing to always bring at least 5 or 6 friends. And so I appreciate that. And we just have to continue to be the light that we want to see in this world, and that's the only thing that I know how to do.
Absolutely.
I'm a person that has my own story, and so I believe in fighting for the underdog, and that's how I arrived in this space. I never thought I would be in this space, but I'm here now, and I don't see myself going anywhere because I know that people hear me say the exact same things as some of the families of the incarcerated and people who have had negative experiences, and they see it and hear it differently when I say it, only because I'm able to speak in a way that they want to receive.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I'm definitely here to continue to encourage people to understand that people deserve second chances, and the United States of America does have an opportunity to right its wrongs. And so, I think that this is the perfect closing. So with all of that being said, I thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you.
And this has definitely been another episode of Second Chances.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.